Bills Mafia. On tonight's Air Raid Hour, Dave and I will be resetting the Buffalo Bills roster. Who are the cornerstones? What will camp battles look like? What positions could be addressed before September? We dive into all those questions and more. But first,
Welcome to the Air Raid Hour, a Cover One Network podcast. Here are your hosts, Judge Mathis and Tilt Money.
welcome in, ladies and gentlemen, to the Air Raid Hour. We had ourselves a nice little week off last week. There were plenty of people breaking down all of the draft picks. We were live for a majority of the draft, and those draft picks that we didn't get a chance to hit on, we will hit on over the course of this evening as we essentially take this roster that Brandon Beane has torn apart and we start to piece this depth chart. We start to piece this roster back together and talk about storylines and certain things to expect as we now go on that long march to August. This is the real offseason in the NFL.
This is the real offseason. We got the schedule release coming up, so we'll obviously get a chance to talk about that next week. But also maybe something that we haven't had in recent years, this June 1st date, right? Coming up with the Trey White cap relief coming up here in a couple weeks. So you never know what might come out of that. Brandon Beane mentions that most of that is going to be going towards signing the draft picks, but it certainly seems like there's still going to be a little bit left over. We've seen them bring in guys like Chase Claypool over the last week. Will there be any kind of other, I'm not going to say big move, but any kind of other needle moving type of move we might see post June 1st? So something maybe to hang our hats on as we get into the summer months here coming up.
Yeah. And as we break down the roster this evening, we'll talk about just that. What position groups maybe are still thin on the Buffalo Bills roster, could still utilize some depth, could use some competition. Tonight, we're going to specifically focus on the offense. We're going to go quarterback, running back, wide receiver, tight end, offensive line. And then on Thursday night at 9 p.m. following Buffalo late night, we're going to do the same exact exercise, but for the defense. So make sure you're not just tuning in tonight. You are also tuning in for a live premiere Thursday at 9 p.m. as well. So save all those defensive questions and defensive comments in the chat for Thursday. So let's start this exercise this evening at the quarterback position. And let's just take a look at the three quarterbacks currently on the roster. We have Josh Allen, we have Mitch Trubisky, and we have Shane Buechele. Allen and Trubisky, they're chalk. Like, we understand that they're going to make the roster. We understand that they're going to be quarterback one. They're going to be quarterback two. I think the real storyline here, as we get into OTAs, as we get into eventually training camp, which can't come soon enough, right? It'll be interesting to trace how Josh Allen's relationship grows with this new receiving core, because two of maybe Josh Allen's closest, partners in crime over the last couple of years, Gabriel Davis and Stefon Diggs, even though that's soured, those guys are gone now. So Josh Allen has some new relationships he needs to build within the Buffalo Bills locker room, within his receiving core.
He does, and it'll also be interesting to see how things kind of, are chemistry-wise with Mitch Trubisky coming back into the fold. Obviously, Josh Allen's had a year with Mitch Trubisky as his backup, so it's good in the sense that he has that familiarity there. He's always kind of had a guy that has, kind of been that sort of other coach, I guess, if you will. No real issue there with Trubisky. I think that the relationship with the receivers is probably going to be the main focal point, right? I think you'll see a lot of maybe some of the stuff you saw Josh with Diggs, and that kind of chemistry. You might kind of see that kind of stuff now with Dalton Kincaid, right? Because a lot of people are projecting him to maybe be the number one target in this offense now this year. How is he going to blend with the guy that they actually paid a decent chunk of money to, and Curtis Samuel as one of their biggest free agent signings? So that chemistry is going to be important. Obviously, we know Josh's sort of style historically has been timing, being on the same page with these guys,
Mhm,
separating these separators in the route running. So, like, chemistry has been traditionally maybe a little bit more important, and timing has been a little bit more important
mhm.
than it might be with a guy like Keon Coleman, who is new to the mix, who is more maybe of a little bit of a contested catch, 50-50, and that's a little bit overdone. I get
Mhm,
that. But yeah, it's a big offseason for Josh Allen. And every year that kind of goes by, there's a little bit more pressure on him to
mhm.
deliver with this team.
And it's gonna be crazy just to see those ramifications. You already see him trying to form that relationship with Dalton Kincaid. It looks like they're golf buddies now. There's a bunch of photographs of them golfing together this offseason. Keon Coleman, he's already been sort of hyping up the Keon Coleman pick. Keon Coleman, it seems like they're already starting to set up a throwing session with some of the receivers. So Josh is maybe putting his hand back a little bit more into the cookie jar this offseason, working with some of these receivers because they are so new. It'll be really interesting to see if it's a breath of fresh air, right? Like, hey, no longer is there a 160 target guy here. We can spread the ball around. We're just going to throw it to whoever's open. It's not about sort of force feeding any one person the ball. Or maybe there's some negatives to this too. There's some downside to this. There were some reports late last season that, hey, Stefon Diggs was not happy with Josh Allen because Josh Allen said, hey, we're good. We don't need to practice this anymore. We'll just figure it out in the game. And Stefon Diggs was like, no, let's figure this out now in practice. And then it blew up in their face and failed in their playoff game against Cincinnati, and that contributed to Stefon Diggs being so mad at Josh Allen. So is Josh Allen going to have those voices in the room that are going to hold him accountable on the other end of that spectrum too? So it's just going to be really interesting to see what the vibe is. It's going to be really interesting to see how it all plays out from a culture standpoint, from an accountability standpoint, and then obviously once we get into September from an on-field standpoint.
Yeah, and that's going to be interesting, especially the sort of the blending of like that sort of vibe with the accountability, right? Because we've seen the Bills be, the videos at practice of them being pretty loose, and like we've seen
Mhm,
that sort of a lot of people have criticized that in the past, but then a lot of people have said like this is what makes this team so operate so smoothly, right? And operate so well on game day is that they aren't sort of over stressing or sort of like putting that added pressure on themselves. But there is a lot of pressure on this team overall to perform this year and to make a deep run in the playoffs with things how things have gone
mhm,
the last couple years. And at the end of the day, people are going to turn to Josh Allen, and it's going to start and end with him. Right or wrong, no matter how good he plays, we saw it in the game against Kansas City in the playoffs last year. We know that the reason pretty much they lost that game was because they didn't have a healthy linebacking.
mhm.
Other members of the defense were injured, but he's still going to shoulder that blame one way or another in some percentage. So that's going to be big for him this year.
We talked about Allen. We talked about Trubisky. There is another quarterback in the quarterback room, and that is Shane Buechele. It was the Buffalo Bills this offseason who suggested to the NFL Rules Committee, they proposed to the NFL Rules Committee, hey, how about we let our practice squad quarterback dress on game days as that emergency third quarterback? And that rule actually passed. So I think that tells you all you need to know about how much the Buffalo Bills want to have a third quarterback on the 53-man roster. So I wouldn't expect Shane Buechele to have a real shot at making the roster unless he blows up in the preseason. And I also don't really think we're probably going to see a fourth arm unless somebody gets hurt or somebody's arm gets tired. Because I think another aspect of this new receiving core that we have is there's going to be a lot of competition. Like they're going to be fighting like dogs for that fourth, fifth, sixth spot. And we're going to be talking about that when we get to receivers in a little bit. I think you're going to want Mitch Trubisky and a guy like Shane Buechele, who's been here for now. This will be his second season on the, was on the practice squad last year. He's here in for training camp this year. You're probably going to want to give those two quarterbacks all the throws they can because those depth receivers need a fair shake, and some UDFA camp body is probably not going to give them as fair a shake as a guy like Buechele or Trubisky. So I expect the both of them to be throwing the ball around the yard a lot in the preseason.
Yeah, I mean, this is not all that dissimilar for what we talked about in prior preseasons, right? We wanted guys like Case Keenum. We wanted guys
Mhm.
like Matt Barkley, and in a time, Mitch Trubisky in years past, right, to be the ones kind of getting these receivers reps. You're talking about uh, at least 5, 6 guys that might be battling for 2 spots, and every rep's
Mhm.
going to be important for these guys. And obviously, we'll talk about that when we get to the receiver room. Joe Marino had an interesting view on how he saw the receiver room playing out. And look, at the end of the day, there's going to be a lot of debate and predictions around who's going to make it in that room. And it could come down to who can get the best reps with which quarterback, whether it's Trubisky or Michelle in the preseason. The preseason is going to be big, and it's going to be up to those guys to try to make the most of those reps they get. With, I think,
Mhm.
A UDFA arm, I just don't, or another arm coming in, I just don't see it. So I agree with you on that one.
The running back room, I low key really like this running back room. I think just the names of the running back room right now, it's obviously James Cook, Ray Davis, Ty Johnson, Darrington Evans, and it's not official yet, but it has been reported the Buffalo Bills will be signing Frank Gore Jr. as a UDFA. The Buffalo Bills appear to be all in on James Cook, and I absolutely love this. I think I've mentioned to you previously, I'm in a dynasty league, not the dynasty league we're in, but a separate dynasty league. I traded Justin Herbert and 2 second-round picks for James Cook and 2 first-round picks, and then I flipped those 2 first-round picks for Bryce Young, who was the number 1 overall last year. I think he's going to have a rebound year with all that money that Carolina spent. So I'm all in on James Cook as well. So I got a lot riding on James Cook this year. I'm expecting big things in year 2 from James Cook.
Year 2 as the full-time starter for sure.
Year 2 as a full-time starter. Excuse me. Apologies.
I think there is a massive floor and expectation now. I think set. I don't know if massive's the right word, but there is a pretty sizable floor of expectations now for James Cook as he now enters his second year as the full-time starter. There is no strong veteran presence like a Latavius Murray or a Damian Harris who didn't really get, a ton of playing time, obviously, in his time in Buffalo. But you do have Ty Johnson, who made the most of his opportunities last year,
Mhm.
albeit in a limited role. But he's a guy that's going to maybe get you 5, 6 touches a game, right? What is Ray Davis going to bring as a rookie? It wouldn't shock me at all to see Ty Johnson operating ahead of Ray Davis to start camp. I think we should all expect that most
Mhm.
likely. How that shakes out in the regular season will be determined, but it certainly is appearing like James Cook is going to get the lion's share of however you want to call it. I mean, look, there are very few bell cows in the NFL
Mhm.
these days, McCaffrey, right? But like James Cook is kind of like in that discussion in that next tier of guys who are going to demand, close to 300 touches between his rushing attempts and his targets. And I'll say maybe not 300 touches, but between targets and rushes, he's going to probably be fairly close to that number coming off that Pro Bowl season. Um, in a situation where the Bills may be looking to kind of continue with some of the trends they had in the second half of last year with Joe Brady running the rock. We saw the success Cook had against teams like the Chiefs and teams like the Cowboys. Um, Big year ahead for him, big expectations for James Cook. Now we just got to hope if James Cook has a season like he did last year and that's all he does, I still think that's a
Mhm.
success for him in 2024. But I think cleaning up a few of those things like the untimely drops is really where we're
Yeah.
going to probably be being a little nitpicky with him. But man, um, things are setting up for him to be a huge focal point of this offense
Yeah.
again.
We're going to do another show later on in the offseason after June 1st, just to make sure the Bills don't do anything crazy on June 1 and add like a Brandon Ayuk or anything and just throw a wrench in the whole conversation. But we're going to have a conversation probably towards the end of June before we take our summer break. And that conversation is going to be the identity of the Buffalo Bills offense and what the Buffalo Bills are going to look like and projecting target shares and all that good stuff, predicting yards, stuff like that. And I'm very bullish on James Cook. Like, I think he could push for like 65, 70 targets in the passing game. I think this Joe Brady offense is going to look a lot different now that he's in year 2 and is no longer sort of saddled with Ken Dorsey's playbook. So I think James Cook, both as a runner and as a receiver, is going to pop off in 2025. So maybe my expectations are too high and I'm going to end up disappointed if he just has a season like he did last year. But I'm expecting big things from James Cook this year. And then you got Ty Johnson and Ray Davis. These guys, I think, are really good complements to James Cook. I think the key to getting on the field for both of these guys probably be pass protection, right? Like that's what you want out of your change of pace, come off the bench back. So a guy like maybe Ray Davis, who Brandon Bean complimented his pass protection in college, could find his way onto the field sooner rather than later because of his pass protection in college. Hopefully that translates to the National Football League. And both Johnson and Davis could be both of use with this new kickoff rule as a kick returner as well. So I really like both of those guys. The size, speed of Johnson, sort of the bowling ball tendencies of a guy like Ray Davis. I really like those guys complimenting James Cook off the bench.
Yeah, and this is a different sort of stylistically, it might be kind of what we were hoping for, but it's a different, it's a different personnel like makeup, right? You don't have the veteran, like the older veteran, like a Latavius Murray. Instead, you have the rookie kind of now
Mhm.
coming in, potentially being behind James Cook. Whereas, like in the past, you had Devin Singletary, who's the vet. You had James Cook coming behind him as the younger guy and kind of take over. We don't expect that to be the case. Obviously, in this situation, you're actually
Mhm.
going to probably have the younger guy and then be kind of the second in line eventually. It'll be really curious to see how they mix up the playing time between Ray Davis and Ty Johnson. But it's nice that the Bills have options. I know both of us were like, why not just bring Ty Johnson back? It's a cheap
Yeah.
signing. He showed well in limited playing time, and it
Mm,
was like that was to me an
yeah.
easy re-sign for
And
the Bills.
And I'll say this, like Ty Johnson, you know why as a Bills fan you should have faith in Ty Johnson? There was no Latavius Murray signing this offseason. There was no Matt Breida signing. There was no Duke Johnson signing. They didn't go out and feel the need to just get the veteran running back for the sake of getting a veteran running back. After Ty Johnson, it's a rather youthful running back court. Ty Johnson and James Cook in their own right are young and youthful. But now you got Ray Davis, a rookie, Darrington Evans, who's bounced around practice squads, and Frank Gore Jr., a UDFA. Genuinely surprised they didn't add a veteran.
Yeah, I mean, and they're still maybe gonna do that, right? I
Mhm.
think maybe
Yeah.
some of the who knows? Like for all we know, they could have been like intent on maybe signing Zeke Elliott, right? And then it just
Mhm.
didn't happen because he's going back to that. Like there's still a couple guys out there, right? So that still may
Yep.
happen. We saw last year just because they had James Cook and Murray, and Damian Harris, excuse me, they still went ahead and brought in Murray, right? So they're not like necessarily
Mhm.
against bringing in multiple vets, and it's going to be a cheap position to add. So again, we'll see. Maybe after June 1st they do something, but as of now, that's all they've got. So yeah.
And they got some good pieces fighting for that practice squad spot too. Darrington
Yep.
Evans, he's got return ability. We saw that last year. And then you got Frank Gore Jr., who, I've comped to like Devin Singletary, where he's just dependable. Like there's nothing special about him athletically. He's not gonna wow you in any way, shape, or form. But when he gets the chance to get out there, he's gonna make the most out of his opportunities. And I think Frank Gore Jr. and Darrington Evans both, whoever makes the practice squad, um, if they were ever called into a game to be like the second or third running back, they could probably do it. So not too bad to have those two guys at the very back end of your depth chart as well.
No, and it's a young group overall, right? And
Mhm.
so I've liked Evans. I've liked him since his App State days. I watched him play at App State. My brother's in-laws are huge App State season ticket holders. Been a big kind of following them for over the years, and he was special coming out. I thought he was definitely a good
Mm.
player. Obviously, he's lost a little bit of a step there, but still brings value as a return man, and there's a reason he's still in the league.
All right, before we get to wide receivers, this show is brought to you by Picasso's Pizza. 4 great locations in Williamsville, West Seneca, Lancaster, and Blaisdell. Buffalo Pizza since 1980. You can order online at picassospizza.net. And if you're an out of towner like us, you can even get it mailed to your home. And we can tell you from experience, it is just as good as getting it fresh from the restaurant. Again, that is picassospizza.net. All right, moving on to wide receivers now. And if you're still upset about the Keon Coleman pick, you can always just go to picassospizza.net, order Picasso's Pizza, and eat your feelings about the Buffalo Bills drafting Keon Coleman. But as it stands, the Buffalo Bills have 11 receivers rostered,
Hmm.
13 if you want to count the 2 reported UDFAs. It's Keon Coleman, Curtis Samuel, Khalil Shakir, Mack Hollins, Justin Shorter, Tyrell Shavers, KJ Hamler, Andy Isabella, Quintez Cephas, Chase Claypool, Brian Thompson, and then the two reported but not official UDFAs, Xavier Johnson Jr. out of Ohio State and Lawrence Keys III out of Tulane. The top four receivers appear pretty set in Coleman, Samuel, Shakir, and Hollins.
Yeah, and you've got a nice mix of guys there now, right? You've got the two sort of, I'll call them primarily slot guys, right? We know Samuel can move all around the field. In his earlier days in his career, he did play mostly out wide, but you got Shakir and Samuel kind of to roam, the middle in the slot areas, and you've got Coleman and Hollins as your boundary guys. It is a nice group, some size in that group, some twitchiness. The top four, I agree, appear to be set. I would be very shocked if those top four weren't, essentially 100% locks.
And then you got spots 5 and 6, which I think are just wholly up for grabs. And maybe even one of these guys lights it up so much in training camp in the preseason that it sort of eats into maybe Mack Hollins targets. I sort of created 2 categories for these last 2 spots on the Buffalo Bills roster, right? Competing for 2 spots 5, spot 6. I think the Bills are likely going to take one from each of those 2 categories. The first category is the smaller, speedier, gadget type of guys who can also probably get vertical if you need them to. That's Andy Isabella, KJ Hamler. You could throw Xavier Johnson Jr. and Lawrence Keys in there as well. And then category 2 is sort of that bigger 4-phase special teamer, Justin Kumaro type in Justin Shorter, Tyrell Shavers, Chase Claypool, and Brian Thompson. And then there's Quintez Cephas, who's sort of like by himself in a third category, because I think he's the best pure receiver of all of those guys on the back half of the depth chart. But who knows what his special teams contributions could possibly be and how that could affect his place on the roster. So following Quintez Cephas as a special teamer could be something to keep an eye on in training camp. But category 1, category 2, am I right in saying it's probably going to be one smaller, speedier guy and then one bigger 4-phase team kind of type of guy?
You would think, unless they just really don't envision Mack Hollins doing much on offense and they're just going to use him for special teams, but you doubt that they're going to have a guy like that be purely a special teamer. I mean, Mack Hollins does have a little bit of receiving chops. So I tend to agree. I think you would maybe see some kind of combination of that. You talk about special teams, Shavers stands out, obviously. Could he have an inside track on one of those spots due to his prolific special teams ability? He was probably the best gunner in college football 2 years ago. I know Merck's a big fan of his as well. And then you got a bunch of guys that kind of like are going to be fighting for spots. Hamler, Isabella, are their skill sets a little bit redundant? Both offer you something down the field. Both offer you something in the return game. There's probably only room for one, if not zero, of those guys on the team, depending on how things go. And I think we're also assuming that the Bills are going to keep 6 wide receivers based on who they have. But remember, they only kept 5 at cutdown day last year. I don't expect that to be the case. They have traditionally kept 6. So it's like 6, 7 guys fighting for 2 spots here. So, and Justin Shorter, who some people will claim to be the next Randy Moss in Bills Mafia, hasn't done anything on the football field offensively for this team, and obviously went through some injury stuff last year. Is he going to have a chance to kind of make a name for himself during training camp? Because maybe it comes down to like one spot for Justin Shorter or Tyrell Shavers fighting for one spot, and maybe it's a guy like Andy and Isabella and KJ Hamler fighting for the other spot if you're going to kind of categorize them in that way. So it's fascinating every year for this group, but because of the turnover now we have in the overall room, who they decide to keep as the last 2 is going to be really interesting.
Yeah, I mean, KJ Hamler, probably the best vertical threat the Buffalo Bills might have on the roster, but his injury history is absolutely frightening. He's got a history of drops in the past as well, but if KJ Hamler is finally healthy, if he's had some time to sort of work on his game, he could be one of the real surprises of training camp. But then on the other hand, you got Andy Isabella, who he's sort of kind of probably in competition with, already got a year in the system, he sort of had a little bit maybe of chemistry going with like Josh Allen. He was playing with the ones, he was cracking the roster. He wasn't cracking the roster at times last year. Obviously, he was a former second round pick as well. The Bills are really collecting those four former second round picks and Samuel, Hamler, Isabella, Claypool. So it'll be interesting to see who wins that battle. And then you mentioned, right? Like Shorter, he was the draft pick. He's the guy they spent capital on. He has a special teams history at Florida. You know, Eric has sort of done film breakdowns of Shorter and showed how he can do things offensively, maybe similar to how Gabe Davis did things offensively. He can be sort of a poor man's Gabriel Davis. But Tyrell Shavers had his moments in the preseason last year. As you mentioned, has the college resume that shows he's got some proven special teams abilities. And then you got the ceiling of Chase Claypool, and you got probably the best pure receiver in Quintez Cephas. It's going to be really, 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 really interesting to see how that all shakes out and what role special teams plays. And that's why we talked about at the top of the show how important it is. Just let Mitch Trubisky and Shane Buechele throw it all over the field in the preseason because these guys need as many targets as they can. It's going to be an absolute battle, and the losers of those battles probably make their way to the practice squad too. So it's going to be interesting. I know probably not the way Bills fans envisioned us to be talking about the wide receiver room here in May, but it is what we have to work with. So I think the Buffalo Bills will make the best of it. And I think there will be some alternate options in the passing game. We talked about James Cook, and then the guy we're going to be talking about next here, and that is Dalton Kincaid, the tight end position for the Buffalo Bills. Not a single acquisition and not a single player left over the course of the offseason. You have Dalton Kincaid, Dawson Knox, Quentin Morris. I'm going to throw Reggie Gilliam in there as a fullback, Trey McKitty, and Zach Davison. On the surface, this appears to be another position that's pretty chalk. I think maybe the biggest talking point that we're going to have this conversation on in June, maybe we can have it a little bit early here on this show. The NFL record for most targets for a tight end in the season is 156. I think Dalton Kincaid could legitimately be pushing into the 120s, 130s, 140s, maybe even the 150s in terms of being targeted with the football this season. That's how high I am on Dalton Kincaid. Everyone wants to talk about Sam Laporta. Everyone wants to talk about, the Bills picked the wrong tight end. I think year 2 is the year Dalton Kincaid with Diggs and Davis gone. This is the time now that Dalton Kincaid is going to show why he was the first tight end taken off the board.
Yeah, and it's going to end up being an interesting situation whether he truly, and probably rightfully so, should be the number one target for Josh Allen, at least to start the season, right? I love Khalil Shakir. He's not going to be, he shouldn't probably be the number one target in this offense, right? Like it's got to be Dalton Kincaid. I think the passing offense now is going to shift from being like Stefon Diggs focused to Dalton Kincaid focused as being the primary target. However, what I will say is that it would not surprise me if you see a lot more spreading of the wealth in this offense than you have in years past, where Diggs got his targets, and he always did. And you had those games where like Gabe Davis either didn't catch a ball or maybe he got like 5 passes. You've got Shakir, Samuel, Kincaid, Knox, now Coleman, Cook out of the back. Like, to me, this is like, and you've used this analogy before, this could like really set up as like a Green Bay Packers-esque style of offense this year. Obviously, Kincaid being the top guy, but I don't know. 150 targets is a lot. I would love to see it. And I do think it is chalk in this position group. I expect it to really be those top 3 guys again this year. Maybe Trey McKitty throws his hat into the ring for a little bit of that competition with Quentin Morris, but the Bills are finally in a good spot with this room after years of purgatory.
I was diving deep for some storylines. One bullet point I had here was Dawson Knox. How much and how often is he involved in the Buffalo Bills offense? How much 12 personnel do we see? How much of like splitting Kincaid out wide do we see with Dawson Knox as a traditional tight end? How is he going to be utilized in this offense? Because he, I think, is going to be a big part of this offense this year. Then the second thing I sort of had was, will the Bills still roster a fullback? Like, is Reggie Gilliam's special teams ability enough to keep himself on this roster, or are the Bills maybe going to look to keep guys elsewhere, and it could come at the cost of a Reggie Gilliam?
I don't know. They love Reggie Gilliam. That's the thing.
Yeah.
So, I mean, maybe, but I don't see it right now. Talk to me again
Maybe
in the summer.
maybe they'll utilize him more this year than maybe they have. It always seems like he has these spurts where he has some big games offensively or is just involved in the offense, and then he just goes away for like 10 weeks at a time. Quentin Morris versus Trey McKitty. Trey McKitty is a former third round pick. He's no slouch. I think that could be like a low key training camp battle. Jay Sternberger couldn't quite push Quentin Morris last year. Maybe a guy like Trey McKitty can do it. So that'll be something interesting to keep an eye on as well. All right. The offensive line. Some new additions, but really not all that many new additions, especially considering all of the subtractions. Returning, you have Deion Dawkins, Spencer Brown, Ryan Vandemark, Richard Garage, Tommy Doyle, Connor McGovern, Osiris Torrance, David Edwards, Alec Anderson, and Kevin Jarvis. New additions via free agency, Lyle Collins and Will Clapp. And then through the draft, we added Tillon Grable, Travis Clayton, and Sedrick Van Pran-Granger. And then reported UDFAs, Connor Britton, Mike Edwards, and Keaton Bills. How fitting that a guy named Bills is a member of the Buffalo Bills. I think we talked about a little bit of that on our Combine show. But Dawkins, Edwards, McGovern, Torrance, Brown, they appear to be the starting five.
Yep.
From there, I think Vandemark and Anderson, they paid their practice squad dues. They paid their red shirt dues. I think they're likely more safe than not. That's 7. Sedrick Van Pran-Granger, considered by many to be one of the steals of the draft, played years at a prestige program. He's likely safe. That's 8 guys. So then you have Lyle Collins, who got a nice little deal. He's probably next in line to be safe. That's 9 guys. So like, if we're looking for training camp storylines, is Alec Anderson going to push David Edwards? That might be one. Is Collins a safe bet as we think? Does he play a little bit of left guard? Does he play a little bit of right tackle? What does he exactly do? What is the Bills' vision for him? Will Clapp, is he a realistic guy to make the roster? Is it maybe him versus Collins? Or is Will Clapp just like the new Greg Manx, a veteran practice squad guy? Those are some of the thoughts that sort of go through my head as I look at this Bills depth chart.
Yeah, and I kind of agree with you on those 7, and I also like almost really want to pencil in Van Pran-Granger as like a
I
lock
would.
at this
There's
at this
no way
point.
we cut. There's no way we cut
Um,
him.
Not a chance, not a chance. Will Clapp maybe just on the team because Sean McDermott likes his name. You just never know.
I
And
like
then
the
the 2
meme. I like the meme, so it's great.
the meme is great, and then you have the 2 late rounders, Clayton and Grable. I don't think they're unless something very weird happens, I really just don't see them truly pushing for a 53-man roster spot this year. Probably great practice squad guys, and I think Clayton is the international.
Yeah, the man's never played a down of football his entire life, like
Yep,
literally never played
yep,
an actual snap of football. He, to me, is the practice squad exemption guy.
yep.
Grable's interesting, right? Because athletically, super promising, but also what's the thing that you see on almost all of his scouting reports? Got a weak base, needs to bulk up. He really seems like practice squad, red shirt type of guy. But if he plays really well in the preseason and his name is being called out a lot, right? He's showing up in a lot of Joe B and Matt Perino and all of their camp reports. Other scouts look at that stuff. They read beat reports from camp. And if the Buffalo Bills feel like Grable might not be safe if cut, maybe he makes it as the 10th guy and he's this year's redshirt offensive lineman. And it leads to a guy like Reggie Gilliam getting cut because the Bills want to redshirt Grable. They don't want to lose him.
Yeah, and I think it would be wise for the Bills to keep Lyle Collins on the roster as much as it might be a little bit tempting to get rid of him, given his position flexibility, giving the veteran presence, especially because if you're thinking that Vandemark and Anderson are going to kind of be your, 6th and 7th guys, you're going to want somebody sort of in that second grouping to kind of be the leader type. And I think Collins would be that guy. So, yeah, it's going to come down to probably one spot for 3 or 4 of these guys to battle out
Yep.
for, whether it's Clapp and and Clayton and not Clayton,
Mhm.
Clapp and Grable.
Mhm.
And who knows? Like, I think Tommy Doyle's run on this team might
Yeah.
be over.
I
It
think
seems like he's been
he
here
might be
forever.
a practice squad candidate,
Yeah,
right? Like, if
maybe,
a guy like
maybe.
Grable gets claimed. Sitting here in May, what do you think the vision is for Lyle Collins? Do you think when they line up for training camp, and maybe we get this answer in mini camp, but when they line up for training camp in late July, early August, is he behind David Edwards at left guard? Or with Ryan Vandemark being more of a true left tackle, not so much of a swing tackle, do you think he lines up at backup right tackle? Where do you think we see Lyle Collins lining up to start training camp?
Given the makeup of this roster right now, I think
Mhm.
he starts as backup right tackle. That would be my just educated guess right now, because you've got Anderson, who's kind of like your. I know he can play all 5 positions, but he's probably going to be your swing guard, I'll call it.
Mhm.
And you've got Van Pran-Granger, who's probably going to get a lot of backup center reps behind McGovern because they need that. Obviously, Clapp's going to get some of those too, but Vandemark looks to be sort of the de facto backup left tackle. And so that leaves to me a hole at the backup right tackle spot, which I think, at least to start with, will be Collins. That would be my guess.
And then the second sort of interesting storyline is Sedrick Van Pran-Granger. Do you think there's a realistic opportunity? Because this has been thrown around now by just about everyone. What do you think about him winning the center role and kicking Connor McGovern back to left guard? I personally, I don't think that that's going to happen. I think the Buffalo Bills were set on moving Connor McGovern to left guard. I think Sedrick Van Pran-Granger probably dropped to the 5th round for a reason. I think that's probably how NFL teams view him. And I think that the Buffalo Bills probably view Van Pran-Granger as a really awesome backup pivot. And maybe in a pinch, he can play some guard. I think at least for the first year or two of his contract, I don't see Sedrick Van Pran-Granger as a guy pushing to start for the Buffalo Bills. Now, that could change with injuries, and that can change if he gets to training camp and blow up. But I really do think the plan is McGovern at center, and I don't think Van Pran-Granger has the arm length to play guard, despite the fact the Bills said he would. I think that's more of an emergency type of deal.
I think that ceiling and talent wise, if you had left to right Dawkins, McGovern, Van Pran-Granger, Torrance Brown, you could see the vision of that being like a really formidable offensive
Mhm.
line in the future, but I just don't see it like immediately.
Yeah.
That doesn't mean that it won't happen this year, by the way. Like, I'm not
Yeah.
saying it won't happen in 2024, but I would be shocked if it happened by week 1 for opening night, and I would be shocked really if that ended up being like some major storyline coming out of camp. I could be wrong, right? I could
Mhm.
be wrong. I know he's a good center. I think David Edwards is fine, but I also don't think
Yeah.
David Edwards is anything like like, I'll put it to you this way. The David Edwards left guard, Connor McGovern center combination to me is a significant drop off from the Connor McGovern left guard, Mitch Morse center combination we had
Mhm.
last year. So with that
And
significant drop off, you might be willing to tool around with some
mhm.
combination of moving McGovern back to left guard and having Van Pran-Granger play some center.
And who knows? Maybe I'm way off base. Maybe you're way off base. Maybe the Buffalo Bills are just not expecting Van Pran-Granger to fall that far, and he really does have a realistic shot of being the starting center from week 1. But
They couldn't have picked an
from
easier guy's name to like I
yeah,
mean,
no. uh, as a fan, I would love it if week 1 our offensive line from left to right was Dawkins, McGovern, SVPG. There we go. That easier.
VPG.
Torrance, Spencer Brown. I would love that as a fan. As a prognosticator, I'm just having such a hard time wrapping my head around the Buffalo Bills actually doing that. All right. Last little bit of sort of offensive line topics here. Right. It'll be really interesting to see of these UDFA guys, Connor Britton, Mike Edwards, Keaton Bills. Who's the new Alec Anderson, right? Who's the guy who comes into camp? Oh, he's working his way onto the second team. He's surprising people. Oh, he's going to be a shoo-in for the practice squad. This is just an Aaron Cromer type of guy. That'll be something really interesting. I think Connor Britton is going to be that guy this year out of Auburn. Just in reading the scouting reports on those guys, that's the vibe I'm getting. But let's not forget our preseason darling last year, Richard Garage. I think he's got a better shot of making the 53-man roster than Grable, because I think there's a world where Richard Garage could really impress and could make the Bills OJ Howard, Lyle Collins, or make the Bills want to carry a 10th offensive lineman. Like Richard Garage, I think he's got left tackle, left guard versatility. Maybe it'll be interesting to see if they move him back to the right side or move him to the right side, because he's never really done the right side. But that's maybe more where the Buffalo Bills have a need in terms of needing more of a backup right tackle, needing maybe some more depth on that backside. Kevin Jarvis is another name to keep an eye on in that regard as well, because he's now been around for a year. But between Garage and between Jarvis, the Buffalo Bills seem to have this method, and they've been doing it with players. Kingsley Jonathan, Cam Lewis, Jamarcus Ingram, who we're going to talk about on Thursday, Alec Anderson, Ryan Vandermark. They marinate on the practice squad, then they get like a redshirt year, and then boom, it's like on to the next progression. So it'll be really interesting to see who that guy is this year.
Yeah, and this is all with saying pretty much nothing about Tommy Doyle either, too, for getting the East.
Poor Tommy Doyle. He looked great in the pictures that I saw. He was like doing some kettlebell work. He looked good. And I think Joe Marino was doing his 53-man roster projection and said, maybe a year on a practice squad is just what Tommy Doyle needs. Like, get his mind right, get his body right, just get back into game shape. Who knows? Like, maybe there's still something there with Tommy Doyle, but I think he's got a long road to climb to make the Buffalo Bills 53-man roster, given that injury history and all the talent that we've added at the position.
Yeah, and it's a deep group, but there are still some question marks, right? I think I like the direction they're headed with this offensive line. I do, like I said in the comment section, I put it in. I still think like we might be overlooking this sort of Edwards McGovern combo and just thinking it's like totally fine. And I'm not saying it's bad, but I'm not like that comfortable with it right now. So we'll see how that plays out.
Yeah,
Cam.
a lot of faith in Aaron Cromer is being placed. I haven't hit the panic button yet. Maybe in the preseason or in training camp, I'll hit the panic button, but I haven't hit the panic button yet. I think I maybe might have too much faith in Aaron Cromer. All right, ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us this evening. We will be back on Thursday at 9 p.m. Eastern with a live premiere after Buffalo Late Night. We're going to be doing the same exact show, except we won't be reconstructing the offense. We will be resetting and reconstructing the Buffalo Bills defense. Dave, any final thoughts before we head out of here?
No, I mean, look, everyone's going to want to talk about receiver, and rightfully so, but there's still some interesting stuff happening on that offensive line. We just spent a good amount of time talking about it. So offensive line is something I'm definitely going to be keying on while we talk about receiver. It's gonna be big, man. And offensive line.
The fancy analogy too now with wide receiver is replacing Stefon Diggs, Gabriel Davis within the aggregate, right?
Yeah,
I know Ryan Sullivan, Greg Thompson, they've been sort of championing that. We're gonna do a whole show in June once we know for sure that this is the wide receiver room. We're gonna do a whole show where we try to sort of break down where the Buffalo Bills target shares could go and all that good stuff. We got a lot of summer ahead of us. We don't want to do it all in one show. So thank you guys for joining us. And again, Thursday evening, we'll be back doing the defense. Until next time, go Bills.
Go Bills.
Thank you for watching tonight's episode of the Air Raid Hour. Make sure to hit that like button on the way out. If you are catching the show on demand, leave a reply in the comment section and we will respond over the course of the week. You can always listen to every episode next day on all major podcasting platforms, including Apple Podcasts and Spotify, by searching Air Raid Buffalo. Thank you for your continued support, and as always, go Bills!